No. Am I proud? I don't have my handle.
I have a song.
Okay, what is this?
Can we sing? Hang on.
We don't want to put this anymore.
Just well,
Are we streaming while we do sing
four,
music?
451. 451.
Yes, so you gotta put on your best voice for the world. No, I'm just kidding.
451, everyone.
You said 451?
Yeah.
We sung that one.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was my favorite song. It's got a tag there. I'm sorry.
I always forget it.
Okay, well, we could sing it again. Oh, how about 210?
18,170 cases confirmed of coronavirus in the U.S.
18,000?
18,000.
Jumped up in a few days. So 210?
That's the total.
What?
Make the music for that one. Maybe somebody else.
I know
Next
it.
one.
I know it offhand.
210?
Yeah.
Okay, go for it.
You ready?
Oopsie.
Wait, tonight is flying.
Yeah.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, you have.
No,
I
good. Sing it.
sing it every camp meeting.
Oh, one of those.
Wait, you ready?
Yeah, go for it.
Wait. We go wait for the night is flying. The watchmen on the heights are calling. Awake Jerusalem, arise. Midnight solemn hour is dawning. His chariot wheels are rolling. He comes prepared, ye virgins white. Rise up with willing
someone might want to make sure that.
Yeah.
Let's sing one, everybody can
Everyone
roll
knows.
around. Let's lift the roof. It's sacred hour.
Literally.
Play around, it's at 65.
Lift the roof and
What number is that?
384.
449.
65 is, oh, you didn't ask.
384.
Wait, which one?
No.
384.
384. 4.
Say we do another week, God has brought us on our way. Let us now our blessing seek, waiting in His waters today. Day of all the week the best, and live on eternal rest. Day of all the week the best, and live on eternal rest. While we seek supplies of grace through the dear Redeemer's name, show thy reconciling face, take away our sin and shame. From our worldliness set free, may we rest this day in thee. From our worldly cares set free, may we rest this day in thee. When the morn shall bid us rise, may we feel thy presence near. May thy glory meet our eyes, while we in thy house appear. Here afford us, Lord, a taste of our everlasting peace. Here afford us, Lord, a taste of our everlasting peace. May the gospel's joyful sound conquer sinners, comfort saints. Make the fruits of grace abound, bring relief to all complaints. Thus may all our Sabbath be, till we rise to reign with thee. Thus may all our Sabbath be, till we rise to reign with thee.
Let's
Can we sing another song? That one I don't feel like we raised the roof.
yeah, we didn't sing.
But let's try to grab me the glory. I think that's an easy one that everyone's been singing.
341. Number 341. So pretty.
To God
Be the glory, great things He hath done. So loved He the world that He gave us His Son, who yielded His life an atonement for sin, and opened the life gate that all may go in. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord. Let the earth hear His voice. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord. Let the people rejoice. Oh, come to the Father through Jesus the Son, and give Him the glory. Great things He hath done. Oh, perfect redemption, the purchase of blood, to every believer, the promise of God. The vilest offender who truly believes, that moment from Jesus a pardon receives. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord. Let the earth hear His voice. Praise the Lord.
Jesus the Son, and give him the glory. Great things he hath done. Great things he hath taught us, great things he hath done, and great our rejoicing through Jesus the Son. But purer and higher and greater will be our wonder, our transport, when Jesus we see. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, let the earth hear his voice. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, let the people rejoice. Oh, come to the Father through Jesus the Son, and give him the glory, great things he hath done.
Beautiful. Let's open our worship with prayer, followed by silent prayer. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Father, we've congregated here this morning to give you the glory. Great things you have done, Lord. As we look out the windows here, as we just steep in the beauties of your creation in this beautiful place, we thank you, Lord, for being the Creator God. And we want to worship you in not just for the earth that you've created, but the promise of the new birth that you've granted unto us. The privilege it is to have the high calling as you've brought us into this movement. Lord, as we come together, we invite your presence again. We thank you for the morning study, for the things that we've learned. And now we ask again for the promise of the Holy Spirit to guide our thoughts, our minds, our words, as we want to learn more of you. And so we thank you for answered prayer, and not just for us alone, Lord, but all our brethren across the world. And we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. 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 So the study this morning is going to be a continuation of what we were looking at the other day. We compared two lines. We compared the line that is created from the book The Great Controversy with a line that is created from the visions were given Ellen White and compiled in the book Early Writings. And we laid those templates over each other. Great Controversy gives us 1798, but I'm going to write 1989 here. It gives us, what other date that we, 2001. And then we've got Sunday Law. This is the Great Controversy. You're right. Close of probation, second Advent. And we compared that to the waymarks that are given us in early writings, which is 1798. And what was the next one? We were looking at external events. 1840, 1850, 1861, and 1863. And our focus was on these. Comparing the issues that Sister White describes in Great Controversy with the issues that she describes in early writings. And what is the controversy in the Great Controversy? Sabbath versus Sunday. And the controversy in 1850? Slavery. And what do they have in common? What's the common factor?
We have a law.
Law. So it's all about law. And we looked at the Sabbath versus Sunday controversy, and the law that the predominant law is, we saw was the fourth, that encompasses the first four commandments, right? And then we looked at our when we looked at the Fugitive Slave Act, we saw that law was to do with the last six. But I'd like us to reconsider that. I think that's an oversimplification. So we know that we're told, the image of the beast, mark of the beast, is the great test for us. So this is to be the great test for the final generation, and this was the great test for the people of that generation. These were the sins of Babylon in the beginning of modern Israel. These are the sins of Babylon when the cup is full at the end of modern Babylon. Let's go to Genesis chapter 1. Genesis 1. Genesis 1, and we're going to read verses 26 and 27. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. So God created man. And man is who? According to these verses. Read the verse. Who's man?
Image of God.
Look at verse 27. God did what? Created man in his own image. So in God's image, right? In the image of God, created what? What's the word?
Him.
He, him. And who's him? And what's the word? Male and female. Them. So who did God create? Them. God created them. And so who has dominion? And God, verse 26, and let who have dominion? And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea. So who has dominion in the beginning? Them, male and female. And then we talked this morning in the Sabbath school lesson that what happens next? Genesis 1 and sin. So with sin, what happens to them? Let's go over to Genesis chapter 3. So what happens to them? So man is them. And if we have a look at verse Genesis 3, verse 16, unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth thy children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. What happens to one of the them?
One rules over the other.
Okay, so we've got male and female. And we give this verse and these verses a name, don't we? What happens to them? What is it referred to? They sin, and what's the result of sin?
Cause and effect.
Yeah, the fall is the sin. They fall, and the result of the fall is a curse. So they're cursed. So this is the curse of the woman. So she gets cursed with what?
Childbirth.
What does she lose?
Oh,
Equality.
yeah.
So what was she given in Genesis chapter 1?
She was a ruler. Yeah.
What was the word in Genesis chapter 1? Dominion. So what did she lose? She lost dominion. And how did she lose the dominion? What's the word used? She's her desire. What's her desire going to be?
Her husband.
Yeah. So the dominion is lost because now her desire has to be somewhere else. So I just want to pick up on that word desire. So
What does that mean? That her dominion is lost and now her desires to her husband.
what was she to do? She had dominion over everything, right? Just like Adam. So that's what was she meant to do for the dominion? Care for it. Now who's she got to care for? Everything's focused on her role is just strictly to Adam. Don't worry about the dominion, he'll take care of that. But with male, let's have a look at male, verse 17. And unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it, and thorns and thistles. So now what does Adam have to do?
Work.
He has to work. So he's got a curse, and it's work. Work by the sweat of your brow. Over what?
I always knew work was a curse.
Over the dominion. Okay, this dominion's going to be a curse because now you've got the whole dominion. She loses, she's not boss of the dominion over anymore. He's boss over her, and he's now got to submit himself to who? The dominion. Okay, the dominion becomes the curse. Okay. Any thoughts on that before we go forward? Are we okay with that?
So it's the work of taking care of the area in Eden.
Yeah. So when are they given the dominion? Whoops. Eden. And as we saw this morning, what's God want to do? Restore to. And we talked about progression. And, I get progression. I've got no problem with the progression as it was shared this morning. Tell you what I've got a problem with. 6,000 years. Seriously? It's going to take God 6,000 years to fix it. Like we've got to get all the way down to the pointy end. And then God, and like 1,000 years is as a what to God? I'm not God. 1,000 years is a long time. And so I know God is patient, but 6,000 years to restore, that's depressing.
And even then we're saying we're not sure what state we're in. Are we actually at the level? It's going to take eternity to get to it.
I don't think he took 6,000 years. I don't think he took 6,000 years. Go to Exodus chapter 20. And let's go to verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labour and do all thy work. But the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work. Thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So what did God create way back in Eden? The Sabbath. And what was the Sabbath? Who was the Sabbath made for?
Yeah.
And who's man?
Then.
The Sabbath is made for them. But them fell and the curse came. But with the Sabbath, what did God say that had to be done on the Sabbath?
Rest.
Rest from what?
Work.
Who's got the curse of the work?
Adam.
So once every 7 days, the curse is lifted from man. He doesn't have to work the earth by the sweat of his brow. The Sabbath, that curse is gone. It's lifted. No more curse. So male, he gets a break, doesn't he? 1 day a week, male gets a break. What about female? Does she get a break? Does the curse get lifted?
No, she doesn't get a break.
No, not really. Well, if it's connected to childbearing, she doesn't get a day off from the children. If that's her work now. If you're saying the work is looking after the man and the family, they've got portions now. She's family and he's outside work.
Okay, let's go back to the verses.
She does.
Remember the Sabbath
It's
day
the
to
day.
keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labour and do all thy work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it who?
Thou.
Thou shalt not do any work, neither thy what?
Son.
Nor thy daughter. Who has sons and daughters?
The female.
The woman.
Them.
Them.
So thou is them. Does it say in it, thou shalt not do any work, thou nor thy wife, nor thy son, nor thy daughter? So who's the thou?
Then.
Them. So every 6 days, what's restored?
Equality.
Equality is baked into the cake of law. It was there every 7th day. If we read it correctly and if people kept it correctly, we have not understood law because we don't read it correctly. Look at verse 1. And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. What did God do? Where do the commandments start? Right here in this verse. What does God do? He brought them out of slavery. So if he's going to bring them out of slavery, is he going to leave them as slaves? He says, and this is how we read, we read, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. But if we read it from verse 1, it's, I brought you out of slavery. You're not going to have any other gods before me. You're not going to blaspheme me. I brought you out of slavery. Remember to keep the Sabbath day because it's going to break the curse of slavery. So it really depends, everything depends on the tone. The problem with the Bible is it's one-dimensional, and we read into it the tone and the force that might not even be there. It's very easy to do with the written word. We do it with letters and emails all the time. We can read into something that really wasn't the original intent. I brought you out of slavery. I delivered you from Egypt. Thou shalt not have any gods before me. You just won't when you realize what you've been redeemed from. So here on the Sabbath day, male gets lifted from the curse. Female was meant to be lifted from the curse if they read the law properly. But who isn't rested from the curse? What does it say in verse 10? Who have they still got?
The stranger that they gave.
Got servants.
They got servants. They got manservants and maid servants. So they got slaves.
But they give them rest.
But are they free?
No.
See, this 1 day a week, she's free. This is dominion, male and female, working together 1 day a week. But the manservants and the maids, what day a week? The 7th day. Now go back to Exodus. Where are we? Go to Exodus 21. Just go to the very next chapter. Now these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them. If thou buy an Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall what? Go out free for nothing. If he came in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If we're married, then his wife shall go out with him. So every 7th day, the curse was lifted from them. But what happened every 7th year? No more slaves. You were set free, unless, verse 4, if his master hath given him a wife, and she hath borne him sons and daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. But if the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him unto the judges. He shall also bring him to the door or unto the doorpost, and his master shall do what? Bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. So what's given the slave here?
A choice.
Sort of, hey. It's kind of a choice. You're free, but there's some ties, isn't there? Because who's got your wife and kids? So it's freedom, but it's not, but you can decide, I'm going to stay. And then what happens? You get your ear pierced. And the ear pierced is a sign of what? What kind of slavery though? Consented or voluntary slavery. So the piercing of the ear is voluntary slavery. You know how Jesus had his ear pierced? Psalms talk about, they pierced my ears. Okay, I'll better find it. So we'll go to that later. Okay, so slavery, the manservant and the maidservant have still got some issues. When do they really fully find freedom? We've got the 7th day, the 7th year, the 50th. And where do we get that from? What's the 5th? Where do we find the 50th year? Yeah, give me a chapter. Leviticus. No, Leviticus 26 is what? What's Leviticus 26? Leviticus 25, because Leviticus 26 is what? The blessings or the cursings of keeping Leviticus 25. So let's go to Leviticus 25. Actually, we're not going to go to Leviticus 25 because you should know Leviticus 25. What's Leviticus 25 about? A day for a year. What's the issue in Leviticus 25? What were the people to do? That's what we always say. It's always about the what? The land. Do you think God cares more about dirt than he cares about people? This is supposed to be an introduction to the study today, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but go and read Leviticus 25. Why was the land to be rested?
Because they worked it all the time.
Who worked it? Slaves. It's all about the servants and the slaves. Okay, God isn't some biodynamic farmer that really just wants you to practice crop rotation. This is about setting we can say the 50th year, or 7 times 7, the 49th, the 50th year Jubilee. What happened? The slaves all got set free. Did they do that? They were cursed. Did they do this? No. It's only the male that's got the break, because one day a week he got to take a day off work. But that's never been realised, and we know that's why we got the 2,520 years of cursing is because what didn't they do?
Take a break.
They didn't set them.
Or they didn't.
What didn't they do?
Free.
They hung on to slavery because they were afraid that their whole economic system would just collapse. Right? But what I want you to see is this isn't just about this is about this. So what we do is we separate and say, this is our relationship to God. You can't have a relationship to God unless you have got a relationship to your fellow man. It's in that commandment. And so when we talk about progressiveness here,
And that's right.
we were free every seventh day. And the slaves were free every 50th year. And that we just don't understand law. And so Adventists at the end of the world think it's all about a day, and this is why they hiccup about 1850. It's not about a day, it's not about a year or a jubilee, it's not about dirt. It's about people, and that was about people.
And that's why that symbol, when we used to draw the lines, we had 50 at the end, and I could see that pattern. I didn't really understand the significance of it. The day of Pentecost is the 50th day when the Holy Spirit's poured out. We used to line that up with the 1850 chart, which is 50. And then the time of Moses, they believed the law was given on Pentecost. It was the 50th day, that's pioneer writing. So you've got 50 right in there. The end of the line is all about 50. Which is Jubilee, which is people, not land, which makes so much sense.
Because it's in Leviticus 25.
Why are we getting cursed for not letting?
Like he's this great gardener. And I mean, he is, but who's to have dominion over the gardener? Over the garden? Man. How we understand law. We separate our relationship with God from our relationship from our fellow man. And that's why the incarnation is so important, because Jesus Christ is a combination of humanity and divinity. It's not separated. He is the law. It's in one.
So it is in the Bible. When slavery wasn't abolished later on in years, there's the proof right there, because they're not studying the law properly.
You don't understand law, and we still don't, because when the vows come along, how are we reading them? We need to go back and really read what God's requiring of us. Maybe there's something we're not seeing. And when we, that quote from Great Controversy, from age to age. Yes, a striking stipulation. What do we call? So here's Eden in the beginning, Alpha. Here's Eden at the end. And what do we call in the middle? What does Ellen White give us? What does she give us? When I come into Adventism, what's the first thing you're going to buy? What's the first thing you're going to put on your shelves?
Spirit of prophecy.
What spirit of prophecy?
Oh, the conflict of ages?
The conflict of the ages. So what's this? All this is the conflict of the ages. And how many ages are there? How many ages?
Okay.
How many books have you got at 5?
Oh, 5.
So we've got a patriarchs and prophets age, a prophets and kings age, and a desire of what? Desire of ages, and then an Acts of the Apostles age, and then what else? The rest. All what's left. Okay? So she's taken us from age to age through these 5 ages. And yes, it's progressive, but we read it. How do we read it? Like, let's compare and contrast. Patriarchs and prophets, prophets and kings. Were God's people meant to have kings?
No.
Were God's people meant to have patriarchs?
Yeah, makes sense.
No.
No, because
Were God's people meant to have kings?
No.
Were they meant to have prophets?
Yes.
Were they meant to have prophets?
Yeah.
Were they meant to have patriarchs?
No.
Big voice.
No.
They were never meant to have patriarchs. What's a king? It's just an extension of a patriarch. But somehow we kind of think, like that was all good. They're patriarchs because one day a week they never kept the Sabbath. So I'll get off my soapbox now. But it's all 6,000 years, really. Come on, that's just not fair. And this is what this is what would get Tess really riled about the Bible, because if you go and just about the situation, if you were to read, if we would go back to Exodus chapter 21, Exodus 21, verse 7. Sorry, Elder Tess. And if a man sell his daughter to be a man's maidservant, she shall not go out as the men servants do. If she please not her master who hath betrothed her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed. To sell her unto a strange nation, he shall have no power, seeing he hath dealt deceitfully with her. And if you read through that, the way women are treated, it's
So when you say they were not meant to have patriarchs, what should it have looked like? A picture?
It's supposed to be them.
Supposed to be them.
It's
It
supposed
was.
to be them.
why
So
does
shouldn't
it have to
the
take
patriarch.
6,000 years to lift a curse? Because if they had have understood the law, they could have lifted the 2520. Did they have to go in, under that curse?
No.
Why didn't they? Because they didn't let the slaves free.
No.
They didn't let the slaves free because they didn't rest the ground.
But it seems like always with these things that God seems to bite. Like why does he do that in Exodus 21? Why does he make that distinction between male and female, which he does from the very beginning of the curse? So you can see why they've got patriarchs, because it almost seems like God ordained it that way. That's how
Yes.
we read it.
Patriarchs are a result of the curse.
Exactly, but it seems like it's his plan to do it that way, so they're not in rebellion doing that. Whereas, like we can see clearly they're in rebellion doing the king.
Yes.
The one seems harder to see.
The issue at the end of the world, the issue as we come up to understanding what Sunday law is going to be, it's how we understand law. The Sunday law controversy, we've got to go back and understand understand a human being and understand what God is requiring of us under the law. So before we actually get to our study, which we'll do we won't finish. Go to 1 Testimonies 264.1, 1T 264.1.
So what page was this?
264 of Testimonies 1. And we're in chapter 55 of 1 Testimonies. The chapter is Slavery and the War. And it's written in 1861. So when is it written? Right down here. And I just want to bring out something out of here, just point one thing she's referring to. She says, God is punishing this nation for the high crime of slavery. He has the destiny of the nation in his hands. He will punish the South for the sin of slavery and for the North, for so long suffering its overreaching and overbearing influence. At the conference of Roosevelt, New York, August 3, 1861, when the brethren and sisters were assembled on the day set apart for humiliation, fasting, and prayer. So I just want you to keep this in mind. When were they assembled?
1861.
What day?
August 3rd.
Yep. And what day would that be?
Saturday.
On the day set apart for humiliation, fasting, and prayer, what day?
Saturday.
Sabbath. What particular Sabbath would it have been? Is every Sabbath set apart for humiliation, fasting, and prayer?
Atonement. No.
They didn't keep atonement. What did they do? What did they practice? What are the days that we set apart? What Sabbath day do we set apart for humiliation, fasting, and prayer?
Communion.
It's ordinances. Okay, so I want you to put that in your little file as we move forward. So it's ordinances, humiliation, fasting, and prayer. The Spirit of the Lord rested upon us, and I was taken off in vision and shown the sin of slavery. When was she shown the sin of slavery? On the day when they were having ordinances. It has been a curse to this nation. The fugitive slave law was calculated to do what? Crush out of man every noble, generous feeling of sympathy that should arise in his heart for the oppressed and suffering slave. It was in direct opposition to the teaching of Christ, and God's scourge is now upon the north. So what was this law meant to do? What's it designed to do? What did you say was, it's to crush out a man?
You know, generous feeling.
Every noble, generous feeling.
Of sympathy.
What do we call that? We could give We have a word for that. Yeah, or empathy, all that, love. It was meant to crush it out of man. That was the aim of it. We'll come back to this. We'll come back to this. I think we'll just move on to the study, and we'll see how far we get through. But so I guess the point we'll leave on is that you can't separate these. That our relationship to our fellow man is very part of the Sabbath law, as much as it is part of the last 6 commandments. And that's why I guess it's kind of the hinge as you lead into the 6 that are coming. You know, you could say, oh, I won't say. Okay. So let's go back to our study of Daniel and John. We'll see how this is connected. So you remember we looked at Revelation chapter 10, and John the Revelator was asked to do what? Commanded to do what? Eat the little book. And when a prophet is a part of the prophetic narrative, who does he represent? Yes, he represents us. So he in that dispensation, he's representing the Millerite people who were told to go and eat the little book because it's unsealed. So there's an increase of knowledge, go and eat it. So, and we went to quotes where Sister White said that the same line of prophecy spoken of in Daniel is taken up in the book of Revelation, that the book of Revelation complements the book of Daniel, that they are the same book, that they're both number 27 of the Old Testament and the New Testament. There's many proofs to show that they're the same book, figuratively speaking. And so we took a little step of faith and took that further to say that Daniel and John are the same person. Because you are what you eat, John ate Daniel. So John ate Daniel, then John is Daniel. And we can bring the two together. And we looked at Daniel and we saw that largely it's his book that gives us the message, and it's the Gospel of John that gives us experience. But I would say that it's also on this, if we compare it to these lines, that we can also see an experience in the book of Daniel and a message in the book of John. So it's not, it's oversimplifying things when we do that. We drew up, I might just do that bigger. We went to the book of John and we put John the Beloved on a line. And we started, the time at the end for John was, do you remember where it was? I should have written this up beforehand. It's easy. John what? 1:1, increase in knowledge, formalization, and the baptism. What was the message given to John? Behold the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sins of the world. So 6 months there was, before Jesus started his ministry, and the Gospel of John is the story of how many Passovers?
4.
So Passover 1, Passover 2, Passover 3, and then we're going to get to Passover 4. Passover 4 is a story given us in John chapter 13. And why did we go to John chapter 13? The Last Supper, but there was a reason we went to John chapter 13. Who was Daniel? What did they call Daniel? Yes. What was the phrase? Thou art greatly beloved. So we wanted to see how that would match up with John the disciple. And John says he's the disciple whom Jesus loved, and he does that in John 13. And he does it 7 more times. So Passover 4 begins when? Thursday night. And goes till when? Friday evening, Friday afternoon, evening. And we saw that this was the early rain experience for John. This is his latter rain experience. And then when was the second Advent? This Patmos. So this would have been his close of probation, which we'll talk about tomorrow. So here we are at the beginning of Passover. Why was Daniel, actually before we even get to that, this is the story of Passover. What's Passover about? What's Passover? What's the story of Passover?
They were passed over. The blood on the those who had the blood on their door, they were passed over. They didn't have their firstborn didn't die. They were passed over. Wait, I'm probably getting mixed up, but
No, that's good. But why? What were the circumstances surrounding Passover? So here we're keeping Passover. Sister White says, if we went to the quotes, which we won't do, she says it's both commemorative and typical. What does it mean when it's commemorative? You're remembering, you're looking back. It's typical, what does that mean? You're looking forward to something. So here they are in John chapter 13, they're keeping the Passover, they're looking back to when? Egypt, and we read from the book just previously, the book of Exodus. Okay, so what did God say at the beginning of Exodus chapter 20?
I'm the Lord thy God who have brought thee out of the land of Egypt.
Of the land of bondage.
I mean, yeah, out of the land of bondage. Yeah. Hold on.
So what's Passover about?
Oh, the Lord
Set
bringing
free
you out
from
of
bondage.
slavery.
They're coming out of slavery. Passover is deeply connected with the issue of slavery. God is bringing them out of slavery. And you know the story, we're not going to go back. They've got sandals on their feet, staff in their hand, their belongings all packed. And what do they have to do? Eat the Passovers. And how are they eating the Passover?
Standing up,
Yep, standing. Why are they standing?
ready to move out.
Who eats while they stand?
No.
Only slaves stand to eat. So when we get down here in time Thursday night, how are they eating? Reclining. Okay, they recline to eat in this situation. It wasn't just there, because they always recline to eat. It was done because they were no longer slaves, which is kind of interesting. If they could recognize, if they really kept Passover, to the spirit of the law, they wouldn't have had any problem being under jurisdiction of Rome, because they would have really realized that they were free. But again, they saw freedom as looking different to what it was. But they didn't get the significance of Passover. So back here, Exodus, in the story of Exodus, they're slaves. And God says, I'm going to pass over you to see what? What does he do when he passes over? And you mentioned it. He's passing over to?
I can't remember what I said.
Why are the angels passing over?
See the blood.
Oh,
Sorry?
See the blood.
See,
yeah.
to investigate. So Passover is about investigating. They're passing over. Okay, there's blood there. Leave them. Okay, there's no blood there, etc. So they're passing over to see, these slaves are going to make their dash for freedom. So Passover, let me pull up a few other. Passover is a really, really interesting feast because it differs from all the other feasts. The other feasts, this is the feast that's given prior to when they're in the wilderness. They're not in the wilderness. So it's prior, you've got no sanctuary, you've got no priests. Who was the priest on the night of Passover? Yeah, patriarchs, but everybody. God wanted to raise a kingdom of priests, and it's the Passover feast that is representative as a kingdom of priests. All the other feasts, it was the typical Levitical service. You had to come of the line of Levi, but not Passover. Passover was the one night where all in Israel were called to be priests. On the 14th of Nisan, for the entire Passover day, the nation of Israel was honoured with the dignity of the priest's office. And the quote for that is Exodus 19:6, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests. So what else will we look at? Just a few things more about Passover, with Revelation chapter 3, when it says, if you open the door, I will come into him and I will sup with him and he with me. That's Passover. And it was about communion. It was a common meal. So it has that sense of unity, of coming together. That's why the communion service is linked with Passover. He wanted to unite all the believers with himself and to each other. A couple of other things. Jewish tradition has it, Passover is, they link quite a few events of the Old Testament with Passover. The night when Abraham sacrificed all the animals and passed through the middle, that was Passover. We talked about this, somebody talked about this yesterday when Abraham entertained Christ and the angels. That was Passover. Yeah.
That was this morning.
This morning.
Yeah.
When the walls of Jericho fell was Passover. The handwriting on the wall in Babylon, Daniel chapter 5, Passover. It was Passover when Esther and the Jews fasted from wicked Haman, because of wicked Haman.
How did you get that out?
Sorry?
How did you get to that?
I'm just saying this is Jewish tradition.
Ah, okay.
So Google.
Yeah, okay.
I'm really clever. So, this is what Jewish, I can't prove it, but I thought it's interesting. They've got 8 things that I didn't realize that they believe, they link for, and I've just put the dot points here. They have their logic, or not logic, but reasons why they can say that they happen with Passover. And of course we do with Revelation chapter 3 when we invite him to come in with me. So Passover, so these are the things that are connected with the Gospel of John. Passover, slavery, freedom, restoration. Okay, enough on Passover. So let's go back to Daniel and John. What did it mean for Daniel to be the disciple, greatly beloved? What did greatly beloved mean? He was greatly beloved.
Favorite.
Marginal reference.
A man of desires.
A man of desires. And what did he desire?
To understand.
To understand and to chasten himself before God. So now we've gone to John chapter 13. We see that John here now recognizes himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. Therefore, he is what?
Daniel.
A man of desires. He's the disciple whom Jesus loves. Okay, so what did John desire? Let's go to, first of all, go to Mark chapter 3:17. Mark 3:17. Obviously, God answered the cry of Daniel's heart. So we would expect that God is going to answer the cry of John's heart. So Mark 3:17 tells us what about John? Who's got it? Just read it out and tell me explain what it tells us about John.
James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, and he surnamed them, how do you say that? Boanerges, yeah, which is the sons of thunder.
So he was a son of thunder. And we'll find out what that means. Go to Mark chapter 10. Mark 10, and we'll start in at verse 35.
And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, come unto him, saying, Master, we would that thou shouldst do for us whatsoever we shall desire.
So they desire something, don't they?
Yeah.
Keep going.
And he said unto them, what would ye that I should do for you? And they said unto him, grant unto us that we may sit one on thy right hand and the other on thy left hand in thy glory. But Jesus said unto them, ye know not what ye ask. Can ye drink of the cup that I drink of, and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?
What did he desire?
To be on the right hand or the
Position.
Position. And we and the other disciples, we don't think too highly of him for this, do we? But what did he desire? He desired to be as close to Christ as he could. But what he thought that meant was position. He wanted to be as close as he could, but what didn't he care about? Where everybody else was. So if he has to walk over somebody to get that position, he'll do it. His brother can have one side, I'll have the other side, but we're just got to be as close as we can. And there were other disciples, one disciple in particular that wanted to be close, but I will talk about him in a bit. But this was his desire. And Jesus is saying, you don't know what you're asking. So he thought that being close to Christ looked a particular way. Go to Luke chapter 9, verses 49. We'll read 49 to 55. Luke 9, 49 to 55.
And John answered and said, Master, we saw one casting out devils in thy name, and we forbade him, because he followed not with us. And Jesus said unto him, forbid him not, for he that is not against us is for us. And it came to pass, when the time was come that he should be received up, he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem, and sent messengers before his face. And they went and entered into a village of the Samaritans to make ready for him. And they did not receive him, because his face was as though he would go to Jerusalem. And when his disciples, that is James and John, saw this, they said, Lord, wilt thou that we command fire to come down from heaven and consume them, even as Elias did? But he turned and rebuked them and said, ye know not what manner of spirit ye are of.
So why is he called a son of thunder? Zap him now, Lord. Let's just get this over and done with. What was the Samaritans' problem? The Samaritans had previously welcomed Jesus, but now Jesus is steadfastly going to Jerusalem. So what does he look like?
a traitor or
No, it's his face. Like he knows he's going to. He doesn't look the happy, warm, loving Messiah that he looked before. Now, those years of toil are taking their toll on his physical body and on his face and his expressions. And they say him, and they keep going. Don't know what's going on, but you better keep going. The disciples don't understand, and so it's like zap them now, because they're not reading the heart. So here we can see why he's called a son of thunder. And who's the god of thunder? Zeus. Things go back to Zeus. Just keep that in your file too, because we might come back to that. So if he's a son of thunder, he's a son of who? Zeus. He's not a son of God.
so that's the spirit of thunder.
Yes. And yet he is one of Jesus's closest followers. So now let's go to Acts of the Apostles 544.2. Acts of the Apostles 544.2. And we won't read it all the time. Tell me when you're there. Acts of the Apostles 544.2. The depth and fervour of John's affection for his master was not the cause of Christ's love for him, but the effect of that love. I think that's a sentence we could probably chew on a bit. I'll just read it again. The depth and fervour of John's affection for his master was not the cause of Christ's love for him, but the effect of that love. John desired to what? To become like Jesus. And under the transforming influence of the love of Christ, he did become meek and lowly. Self was hid in Jesus. So let's write, what did he desire? So Daniel desired understanding and to chasten himself. And I suggest that John desired to Christ-likeness and to chasten himself. We'll read further. So really we want to know, how did that transformation take place? So let's go back to John chapter 13. John chapter 13. And let's read, I'll start reading verse 1. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. And supper being ended, the devil having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. So let's just talk about this for a minute. It says, now before the feast of the Passover. So what does he acknowledge here? Before the feast of the Passover, and then verse 2 says, and supper being ended. So what does that mean?
After.
Sorry?
After the Passover.
Oh, that's not.
Passover is a 24-hour period, right? Now, in the day of in Christ's day, and in particular in his day, there was kind of this tradition that if you were a Pharisee and a conservative, or a Galilean, because Galileans were conservative. So if you were conservative, which meant either Pharisee or Galilean, you ate the Passover supper on Thursday night. If you were a Sadducee or a liberal, a liberal, which means a Sadducee or a Judean, you ate it Friday afternoon. That's why if you flick over to John chapter, I think 18. John 18 says, verse 28, then led they Jesus from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment, and it was early, and they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. So here they haven't eaten Passover yet, because they didn't eat it until Friday afternoon. Whereas the disciples, the Pharisees and conservatives, ate it Thursday night. You could actually eat it any time through that 24-hour period, but that's the kind of the way it went then. So this is why it says here in John chapter 13, before the feast of the Passover and supper being ended. So what has happened is it's Thursday night, and what have they done? They've eaten the lamb. He ate the lamb with the disciples. You know, we make much of him eating fish. Well, he had lamb as well, which he would have, it's Passover. So they did eat the Passover supper. Verse 3, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he was come from God and went to God, he riseth from supper, laid aside his garments, and took a towel, and girded himself. After that he poureth water into a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel wherewith he was girded. Then cometh he to Simon Peter, and Peter saith unto him, Lord, dost thou wash my feet? Jesus answered and said unto him, what I do thou knowest not now, but thou shalt know hereafter. Peter saith unto him, thou shalt never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, if I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me. Simon Peter saith unto him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus saith unto him, he that is washed needeth not save to wash his feet, but is clean every whit, and ye are clean, but not all. So, we know the story. Where are we on our line? Let's put our priestly markers in it. Time at the end is what? 1989. And here we've got 2001, which begins our early reign. Our next marker is 2014. And what's 2014? Sunday law. Close of probation is 2019, and this is 221.
So Terrie, you got the one after that.
Sorry?
The one. 2001. 200.
Oh, thank you. Let's go to Desire of Ages 643.3. Desire of Ages 643.3. We good? On this last evening with his disciples, Jesus had much to tell them. So we're on this last evening. What's Jesus got to tell them? Lots. What's the lots he's going to tell them? What's the lots that he's got to tell them? Where's this waymark? But chapters what? 18 and 19. What's in between? 14, 15, 16, 17. He's got lots to tell them. We've got a lot of information in these chapters between Thursday night and Friday afternoon. So on this last evening with his disciples, Jesus had much to tell them. If they had been prepared to receive what he longed to impart, they would have been saved from heartbreaking anguish, from disappointment and unbelief. But Jesus saw that they could not bear what he had to say. As he looked into their faces, the words of warning and comfort were stayed upon his lips. Moments passed in silence. Jesus appeared to be waiting. The disciples were ill at ease. The sympathy and tenderness awakened by Christ's grief seemed to have passed away. His sorrowful words, pointing to his own suffering, had made little impression. The glances they cast upon each other told of what? What's their problem? Jealousy and contention. And the next paragraph starts there, quoting, there was a strife among them about what? Who is the greatest? So there's strife. Strife about who is the greatest. This contention carried on in the presence of Christ grieved and wounded him. The disciples clung to their favourite idea that Christ would assert his power and take his position on the throne of David. And in heart, each still longed for the highest place in the kingdom. They had placed their own estimate upon themselves and upon one another, and instead of regarding their brethren as more worthy, they had placed themselves first. And then it goes on to explain how James and John had really upset everybody in the room. So she says another cause of dissension had arisen, and that was, what's the problem? John chapter 13. Chapter. We're in John chapter 13. We're in Desire of Ages 643.3 in the paragraphs that are following. We're in the upper room. And what's the problem? We know there's strife and jealousy and contention, but something has to happen. They've eaten the supper, and what still has to happen? They've got dirty feet. They've got dirty feet. And nobody wants to do it. So we understand. So the problem is dirty feet. What's this got to do with Daniel? If we were to go to Isaiah 52 verse 7. Isaiah 52, 7. Why is feet so important? What's this big deal about dirty feet? Isaiah 52 verse 7. Would you like to read that, Victoria?
Isaiah 42, verse 7. Right.
Yeah.
To open the blind eyes, to bring.
52.
Oh, 52, sorry. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publisheth peace, that bringeth good tidings of good, that publisheth salvation, that saith unto Zion, thy God reigneth.
So what are feet? What's the purpose of feet?
To bring good.
Spread the gospel. You've got to have feet to publish tidings. What's that got to do with Daniel? You remember at the end of Daniel, Gabriel says, go thy way, Daniel. Stand in your lot at the end of days. And what does it mean to stand in your lot at the end of days? It's when you're ready to fulfill your purpose. And what's the purpose of Daniel? Because we're Daniel. So what's our purpose? Where do we get our purpose from?
Message to the world.
3 angels' message is Revelation. That's John. Where do we get that in the book of Daniel? Yeah, no, go back. Where do we find our purpose? Why has God raised us up? Give me a verse. Okay, give me a chapter. Where do you think we found our purpose from? If we were to put our line on
Daniel 11.
Daniel 11, now give me a verse. Where do we find our purpose? 40 just announces that it's the time of the end. 44 says what? Somebody's got to give tidings out of the east and out of the north, right? So what's our purpose? That's it. That's the verse in Daniel that says this is why we're here. And if we've got to give tidings, what do we got to have? We've got to have beautiful feet. We've got to have beautiful feet. So, and we could do, you can do a whole sort of word study on this. The difference between, what do feet do? What have you been doing with your feet this week, Tiffany?
Walking.
And running. Some of us have been walking. Sister Tiffany has been running. So our feet walk and they run. When our feet walk, that's our relationship with God. We walk with the Lord. But when we run, what are we doing? You got to take tidings. Your running is, write the vision and make it plain upon tables that he made. Run that readeth it. And you know the story of, is it Cosby? You know that the messenger that I want to run, but you have got tidings, he says. You've got to have tidings. That whole story in there, wanting to run and got no tidings. So tidings are connected with feet, and we run with the message, we walk with our Lord. So one is our work and the other is our experience. So here we're on 10 minutes. Okay, and we'll do the rest tomorrow. Let's sum this up. Here we are. Jesus has much to tell them. He wants to get them ready to do what? Run. And what's their problem?
Their feet are dirty.
They've got dirty feet. Their feet aren't beautiful. They've got to be cleaned. So what that job is usually done by who? The servant. Who should have washed the feet on that night? The disciples. Let's go and look at I'll go find a verse. Sorry. Go to Matthew chapter 23. Matthew 23. We'll start at verse 8.
I can read. But be not ye called Rabbi, for one is your master, even Christ, and all ye are brethren. And call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father, which is in heaven. Neither be ye called masters, for one is your master, even Christ. But he that is greatest among you shall be your servant.
Thank you. Who should have washed the feet that night?
John.
Sorry?
The one who wanted to be the greatest.
Yeah.
Who was the greatest in the room?
Oh,
So who washed the feet?
Christ.
Who should have washed the feet? The very one that washed the feet was the only person in that room that was qualified, thank you, to wash feet was Jesus Christ. He was the greatest in the room. So he washes the feet, and who does he start with? Do you remember from the Desire of Ages?
No, Judas was last, I think.
Was he last?
He was the first. and John
Judas was the first,
Judas was the first.
and John the Beloved was last.
Wasn't Peter?
I'll just read from RC 261.2. RC 261.2 says, the disciples had been disputing as to who should be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. They could not agree. One would claim the honor for himself, another for himself. None of the disciples were in a proper frame of mind to comprehend the significance of coming events or to appreciate the solemnity of the present occasion. They were not prepared to participate in the Passover supper. So they weren't in a proper mind to do what? So we're here, we're 2014. What couldn't we understand? The significance of coming events. So we couldn't understand the future, and we couldn't understand where? The present. The significance of coming events, and this describes the movement perfectly, 2014. The significance of coming events or the solemnity of the present occasion. Present solemnity. So if we go to Peter's reaction, right? Peter's reaction was what? Don't wash my feet. So Jesus says, if I don't wash your feet, you're lost. Okay, this is salvational. And so what was Peter's reation?
They wash my whole
Wash
body.
everything. And God says, Jesus says, no, you don't need to be washed. Why? Because he's already been washed back here. Okay, he's already been washed back here. But over this time, what has he still got? What's his problem? As he's walked, there's what has jumped onto his feet? Dirt, and dirt is? It's the world, isn't it? So there's bits of the world that are sticking to his feet, and his feet are meant to carry the what? The tidings, the message. And what is the worldliness? What's stuck to our feet that needs to be washed away? All this jealousy, condition, strife comes from conservatism. And this is why the message here of equality and sexism and all that goes with it, racism and all the rest, that's the dirt on our feet. So that Passover supper is really it's a parable of what equality looks like. And what does equality look like? According to John chapter 13, the verses we've just read. What did Jesus do? Slavery, servitude. There's a slavery that's of God and a slavery that's of devil. What's God calling us to be? Servants / slaves. If you were to go to Philippians chapter 2, I know we're all familiar with that, but let's go to Philippians chapter 2. How long?
3 minutes.
Okay. We'll stop here. Philippians chapter 2. We'll start in verse 1. If there be therefore any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, if any bowels and mercies, fulfill ye my joy, that ye be like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. So what's Paul saying? You know, if you want to make me happy, you really want to make me happy, he says, fulfill my joy. Be of the same mind, have the same love, be of one accord. He says, don't do anything, let nothing, no thing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem other better than themselves. Look not every man on his own things, but every man on the things of others. So what he is doing there, let's read verse 5. So verse 5 says, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. What mind? No, give me the verses. He said, let this mind. So this is a what kind of word? It's a pronoun, right? So there's got to be something. What mind is he referring to? Yes, the ones he's just explained in verses 3 and 4. What kind of mind? The mind that does nothing through strife or vainglory, the mind that is lowly and esteems others better than themselves, the mind that doesn't just look on their own things, but also considers others. And now he's going to illustrate that. He's going to say, let me show you what it looks like. The mind of Christ. Let's see how it was enacted. Who, being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God. So he's got equality, hasn't he? He knows he's equal. He's got equality, but what does he do? Makes himself of no reputation, takes upon him the form of a, you can put a line through that. That Greek word is slave. And was made in the likeness of men, and being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. Wherefore God also hath highly exalted him. Before honor is humility. So the mind that Jesus had was one that esteemed others better than himself, even though he knew who he was equal to. And this is what we were discussing yesterday, as far as when we consider the priests, the Levites, and the Nethinims. How only are we going to bring these other two groups into our fold? If we esteem them better than themselves, is that just sort of fake? Is that just thinking, yeah, you know, they're really better than us, but, you know, we are the priests? No. See, when we call ourselves a priest, we put ourselves back into that Ezra time period where the priests were the better ones and the Nethinims were the leftover people, you know, that came and did the dirty jobs. And we've got to really reverse that today. We get that whole priest, Levites, Nethinims thing from, but they're only symbols from that book. That's the only thing we take from it, you know, I mean, and the restoration of the sanctuary. But when we esteem them better than themselves, that is a real experience. We're the ones with all the dirt on our feet. So for time, we're going to leave it there. Is anybody? We sort of ran through the last of that pretty quickly. We'll go over it again tomorrow and then continue on with this study. So just in closing, we're looking at the line of John. We want to compare his experience with Daniel. We know that Daniel was greatly beloved, a man of desires. John was the disciple whom Jesus loved, a man of desires. He desired Christ-likeness. He desired it in this time period here. He thought he knew what it looked like. On the Passover night, he received an illustration of what it looked like. He now knew what was required of him. When his feet were washed last, it was an honor. And now he could call himself the disciple whom Jesus loved. He knew who he was. What we see illustrated here on the Passover night is what, when it comes to our movement, what was brought in, what do we mark in 2014? Organisation. There was somebody there that night who saw what organisation looked like, and it wasn't what they'd signed up for. And what did they do on that night? Who was that? And what did he do? He's gone. He left here, but did the disciples know it?
No.
They just think it's business as usual. He's gone out to do what he always does. He carries the purse, he goes and does the stuff for them. But he's gone there. They got no idea. They're not going to know till when? Till he hangs himself down here. Okay? But organisation, and this is the thing, we're still running around trying to get organised here, but we need to go back to understand what organisation looks like. Why, people are kind of tripping over what's being done in our time period. We need to go back and understand maybe why we're tripping over. It's like we're catching up with the movement. It's this train that's we're still trying to jump on. Anyway, we'll revise some of that tomorrow. So we'll close for time. And I invite Emma, would you close in prayer for us, please?
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the light that is shining upon us from past dispensations. We thank you for your Holy Spirit inspiring patriarchs and prophets of old to write these things down for us that we might learn from them. We are convicted of our own sin as we see these lines, Lord, and we recognise that we are the disciples, that we are people with baggage, with lots of wrong ideas about you and about the work of the priest, about the work you're calling us to do. Help us, Lord, to see the reality of this work, to see what it means to be a slave or a servant, and not to hunger and thirst after the highest place, not to be promoting ourselves, but to recognise our weaknesses, that we might rely upon you to change us. Please continue to pour out your Spirit upon us as we fellowship together. And we pray that you would guide us and lead us into all truth, as you have promised, that the truth might truly set us free from the wrong kind of slavery, and help us to embrace the slavery that you're calling us to at this time. Thank you now for this Sabbath day, and we pray that you would continue to walk with us through it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
May I ask a question? Thank you.